Jack, thank you ever so much for joining us again. It's fantastic to have you on a very hot and sunny Wednesday morning here in the UK. Hence, if you're watching us on YouTube, why I have my curtains closed, because the sun is the other side of this and it is very, very hot. I'm not just sat here in the dark. So, Jack, what have you been excited about for this week, or anything you've been up to, anything you've got planned? Let us know.
Yeah, it's not a work-related one this week, but I want to speak about something pertaining to mental health stuff, and that is getting things in motion to actually start seeing a therapist regularly, having it as like a weekly check-in, and I think something that isn't necessarily there to like heal a specific thing, where it's not like I've got X problem, so I want Y solution, but something that is going to be an ongoing conversation. And no matter where you are at in your life, someone that you can actually put those things on, be able to discuss them with effectively. And I think I learn quite a lot by kind of speaking things out in real time. So having someone to have that conversation with. And I am excited about it. I think it's something that's important to speak about as well, and to normalize, and to be able to say that people do. Because if I had an injury, a physical injury, I don't hesitate to tell people that I'm going through physio, or, you don't hesitate to tell people when you've got a certain problem that you want to fix or whatever. But I think just the word therapist or counselor or anything around that kind of mental health arena, as everyone knows and speaks about, does have stigma that comes with it. So I think being willing to chat about that openly and, tell people in your life what you're doing with that is important.
Massively. The point you touched on there, which I think is the stigma side of things, is, with mental health, it's a case that we don't necessarily see the problem, and I think for a lot of people, what you can't see, it's hard to magnify. As I said to you, I go to therapy as well, for a number of reasons, actually, but in fairness, like, I think it's something that everyone should do if you have access to it,
Mhm.
because, as you say, it's that ongoing conversation. And although some people have really good support circles, people have really good friends, really good family members, I think it's something that you can do for you. And it's not something which has to have this stigma about. As I said to you off air a second ago, it's it seems to be one of those things that people kind of, ooh, you're seeing a therapist. Like, are you okay? It's like, I'm fine, but I can enhance myself by doing this, or I can, really get the most out of a process that I'm involved in, or get the most out of a situation, perhaps, because there's always certain parts where things will happen, and whether it's speaking to clients about what they're struggling with or what you're struggling with, it always helps, I find, to offload that with someone who can help you manage it.
Mhm.
Um, I know that, for example, psychologists see psychologists, and their psychologists will see other psychologists, because it's all about keeping the circle going so that not one person is left with the buck, almost.
Mhm.
And I think it's important to note that when you coach a lot of people and you get involved in their lives as well, that you shouldn't hold on to that. And I wonder how many coaches are listening to this now who go, yeah, I go to therapy, or maybe think, maybe I should go to therapy.
Mm. Yeah, two things to underscore there as well. You said about how there can be a stigma that comes with it, and you're like, no, everything's fine. I'm just going to therapy or whatever. Sometimes things also aren't fine, and it's important to acknowledge that therapy can directly help that as well. Again, like with the physical example, if you've got a physical injury, you'll go and get that physical injury sorted, and it should be the exact same approach for things mentally. And secondly, even if you've got great support systems, like I have got unwavering support in my relationship, and I know that, and I know that I can speak to her about absolutely anything. But it's also not her job, it's not her role, and there are certain things that I think it does make sense to speak about and to share, and to even talk about what you've been talking through in therapy, perhaps, and share some of that experience. But it's not always your partner or your family's job to be the person that you onload that to, sorry, and that you just kind of give all your problems to, in the hope that they will solve it. Instead, going to someone who is a dedicated professional who has training and education around that, I think is a much better use of your time and a use of your resources, and then can also result in a better relationship as well. Because, you know, For example, my relationship, she also works extremely hard and works long days and works nights and weekends. And, I don't want her to get back from a shift and then it be all about soothing me, and going through problems that I've got. And so those sorts of things, like having someone dedicated you do that with, and then having more focus on the relationship when you're actually in the relationship, is not only going to benefit you in terms of mental health, but also in terms of that interaction as well.
Yeah. What's interesting for me is that you mentioned there about it being, you know, a physical thing is much easier to maybe speak about and handle. Um, I had 5 operations before I went to therapy. So I had my shoulder reconstructed I just turned 16. I had 4 knee operations, and then I went to therapy before my 5th knee operation. And if you treat that as like a trauma, if you like, all of those operations and everything that kind of came around that, if I look back, I wish I'd gone 10 years ago,
Yeah,
because it would have helped me to clarify my own thoughts on the situation. And it's like you said, it's not something to be afraid of, because fundamentally, what your body goes through. If someone saw me on crutches, right, they saw me in a knee brace, their immediate reaction is, obviously he's had knee surgery, or if they can't see the scars or whatever, obviously he's injured his knee. But if they see you walking around and maybe you're having a bit of a down day, they just think, oh, this guy's miserable. But do you know what I mean? And so, internally, the dialogue that you feed yourself is critical, because, I went through a massive phase of blaming myself for the operations that I'd had, which looking back is completely ridiculous. But it was the only way I could manage that system. For me, it was a way that I could say, if it's my fault, I can deal with that. I can't deal with the fact that it's an uncontrollable. I couldn't deal with the fact that it wasn't my fault. So it was easier for me to say, well, maybe I didn't do my rehab properly, or maybe I shouldn't have done this or shouldn't have done that. And the truth is, therapy helped me to realize that actually it's okay to have these instances which are out of our control. It's okay to have these points where we actually don't have to own it. We don't have to take responsibility for it, because sometimes it's just a shit situation. And that is what life is. But as I said, it took me 5 physical big operations to fix one mental. Do you know what I mean? It's like, in theory, I should have probably had therapy the whole way through, but instead it took me 5 to realize that actually I wasn't okay, and I did actually need some kind of help, because I could no longer dig myself out of that hole. Which underline what you said. Sometimes you go to therapy because you actually need it, and you do need some help. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Just as my last point on this before I hand back to you, the biggest mistake I made was trying to fix myself before I went to therapy. So I was like, I'll go to therapy once I've worked through some stuff. And I look back at that and just think, I coach people and they come to me for fat loss or muscle gain. They don't get into great shape and then go, I'm going to get a coach.
mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? You get a coach because you want help with something. And I look back and just think, what an idiot. I eyed up a process of going to therapy, but I put it off because I said, I'm going to fix myself first.
Yeah, and that's got to be something to do with pride or self-esteem or wanting to come
100%.
across in a certain way, ego, and I think there's definitely a level of stigma obviously that comes with that, but it's also, and why I wanted to bring this up was because it's also just the fact that it's not frequently spoken about. Like if you have a knee injury, like you say, the common thing is, oh, have you been to the doctors? Oh, have you been to see a physiotherapist? Have you gone and got someone's opinion on that? Whereas, like you say, if you say I'm having a down day, if you say I'm feeling depressed, if you say whatever it is, people are like, oh, have you tried being happy? Which is kind of equivalent to you being like, have you tried doing your own knee surgery?
Have you tried walking properly, mate?
Yeah. But because it's not spoken about, it's just not common rhetoric. And, especially with generations before us and how we grew up and everything, it certainly wasn't. It's getting more and more into the kind of common conversations now, which I think is absolutely great. But until it becomes a much more normal kind of default response, and until we get to that point, it's always going to be in the shadows a little bit. And so I think the more opportunities that you can have to speak about it in a way that is the right kind of time to raise it and have those conversations with people, I think it's really important.
What do you reckon? Why do you reckon there is still such a stigma about it? What do you reckon is the
I
like?
think a lot of
There's
it's
probably
that exposure. I think it's the lack of publicity almost, like new ideas, new concepts, things always start out small and they start out niche and then they start to build out once they become more mainstream and once more people are speaking about them. It's just a new
yeah,
concept, like our parents' generation and as I say, how we were raised. I never heard of that growing up. I didn't know a single kid who would call himself depressed. It
yeah.
just wasn't a thing. That doesn't mean no one was. It doesn't mean people weren't going through mental turmoil and struggles. It just wasn't a part of common conversation. Whereas now you hear people starting from a lot younger speaking about these sorts of things, valuing mental health, just knowing the terminology and the conversations to have, and just knowing so much more than we did. And I think until it's more spoken about, it's always going to be that way. What do you think it is?
I wouldn't say it was too different from that. I think apart from that point, and not be boring and just say I agree, I would say that it is partly an education point of view in the sense that we understand fully the mechanisms of the human body in the physical sense. So, just for my knee, for example, you see an MRI, my ACL is quite clearly snapped in half. Like, that's a cut and dried, that's a black and white thing. I say to you, hey, Jack, I've torn my ACL. You can Google that and it would come up with 5 million things, but the picture would always be the same. So the picture of a torn ACL, whether it's at the top or the bottom or the middle, whatever, would always be very cut and dry. You can see it. I think people struggle with mental health because some people trying to be open about it, which is obviously what we're talking about here. It's about getting it out in the open and exposing it for something that everybody has in some dynamic. You know, if we all did a test to see if we had some kind of mental health issue, I'm pretty sure 99% of people would clock up something because it's almost impossible to be, on a scale, if you like, that is so subjective. Okay, if you get what I mean. Like, if you scanned my knee, if it looks great, great. But then if you scan every inch of a human brain, in terms of a questionnaire, there's going to be something that might come up that's a bit like, maybe that's not quite right. And I think that when it comes to talking about these things, some people are so closed off to it that they're very dismissive. And you touched on it briefly earlier when it's like, just be happy. The most frustrating phrase of my entire life, having been through depression, having, and maybe that's something we can podcast on at some point, talking through that in more detail. But the most frustrating thing I ever heard was there's worse people off in the world. And the reason that's so frustrating for me is because when you're happy, someone doesn't tap you on the shoulder and go, hey, dude, someone just won the lottery. You don't have the right to be happy. It's like, what? Do you know what I mean? Like, it's okay to express one emotion, but because your emotion could be making that person feel uncomfortable, in the sense that if you're feeling a bit down, they don't know how to express their own emotion. And that's where things get put in the locker. So it's like, oh, mate, don't worry about it. Be really dismissive and try and, not talk it through so that they don't make you feel bad about your emotions. But actually, if you had a sit down and chat, which, we could do and we probably have done over the time, where you just go, do you know what? It's been a bit rough lately. Like, this is why, this is why. It makes you feel a ton better. And it's not that you want an answer all the time. And that's why I think some people struggle. They think, well, I can't help you. Like, let's just move on. Let's just talk about something different. The truth is, some people just want to be listened to. Some people just want to have that kind of verbal expression of their thoughts so they can hear themselves back and then be like, in therapy at the moment, I often start talking and then realize I've answered my own question. I'm like, actually, that's probably why. And he's like,
Mm-hmm.
yep, I'd say that was why. And like you said, having that continual conversation is very helpful. But until I think people start to understand that when people want to talk about how they're feeling and things, it's not a direct reflection of themselves. And if they're struggling to hold that conversation, then perhaps having that conversation is the right thing to do. We've spoken before about how if you have a situation that you look at and go, I don't want to do that. I don't want to have this conversation with that person. Go have the damn conversation. Because if you're steering away from that, it's likely that the fruit is in the making. It's in that conversation and you need to go and have that.
Yeah, I heard a really good quote yesterday on a podcast. It was something along the lines of the thing which you most need to face is hidden where you least want to look. And I think that
Yeah,
is so true for so many things.
absolutely. And that I think sums up perfectly why I didn't go to therapy, because I didn't want them to expose the things that I hadn't yet figured out. And it's like you said, it's pride. It's going there and being embarrassed that there was something I didn't know the answer to. And I thought, I don't want to burden them with my issues. But that's the whole point.
It's
It's
what they
not
get
about
paid for.
burdening
It's their
them.
job.
Yeah, exactly. And like he said to me, you're not burdening me with these issues. He's not. He said, I don't write them down and read them before I go to bed at night. He said, he's quite funny actually, this guy. But he said the idea is that you process them, we talk about them, and then I'll process them with somebody else. Um, and fundamentally, it's as you say, it's those difficult conversations, those hard things to have. Nobody realistically wants to go and ask for a pay rise. It's a difficult question, but tell you what, if you go and ask, you're going to get an answer, and the least they can say is no. So, in that fact, it's worth the conversation, right?
Yeah. Let's do a whole other podcast on it another time for
Yeah,
sure.
let's. Maybe we'll take some questions because it might be interesting to see what like people's thoughts are. If you're listening to this now and you're thinking, actually, I've got a question, don't wait for that Q&A to come up. Just fire us a DM,
Mhm.
because it would be interesting actually to have that kind of dialogue with you guys. We've always said we've got an open door policy or open inbox policy, if you like, for people to kind of fire away. Let us know your thoughts. Let us know how, what you think of stuff. And if we were to do a podcast, what you'd want us to talk about, like what would you want us to kind of discuss? And I'm pretty sure I can speak for both of us that we're open books. We'd be happy to dive into stuff and answer points or maybe discuss points in more detail.
Mhm. Yeah.
Right then, today's topic. Let's talk. So recently, we've had quite a lot of people going back to the gym, and we've obviously done that podcast now. And now we're getting a lot of people wondering actually how to manage certain situations, and mostly surrounding diet. So we've had a lot of people come through the DMs, had a few emails, just based around like, hey, I'm actually loving the gym at the moment. I don't want to be dieting anymore. I don't want to diet. I actually want to go through a bit of a gaining phase. The problem I have is that I've got a lot of social events. I've got a lot of parties. I've got a lot of eating out. And I think that, with the current climate, everyone's trying to kind of make up for lost ground in a sense with
Mhm.
social activities and so on. And, in general, I think, as you'd agree, it's mostly easier to go out and socialize when you're on more calories, versus
Yeah.
less. But let's chat through setting this up. So for you, if you had a client come in, um, relatively intermediate, so good kind of training age, good knowledge of nutrition, handles themselves very well, and they said, "Hey Jack, look, I'm real stuck right now. I've just started back in the gym. How do I set myself up for this gaining phase? How do I know if it's even the right thing to do? Like, where do we start?"
The absolute starting point for any goal, and people who've been listening to the podcast or following us for a while are probably going to be sick of me saying this by now, but there's a reason that I always keep saying it. And that is that you have to start with an honest assessment of where it is that you want to go and what you're willing to do. If you're coming to me and saying, I want to set up a gaining phase and I want to gain every last pound of muscle that I possibly can in this world, then that's going to be a different approach versus someone saying, I want to gain a little bit, but I also want to keep up all those social events. I don't want to be too strict with tracking, etc., etc. And there's not a right or wrong. There's only ever situational right and wrong. You have to decide what your situation is and then how we can best serve that. And that's what it always comes back to with clients as well. It's never just a case of saying, here's what's optimal, piss off and do that. It's actually about saying, what do you want to get out of this? What are you willing to do to get to that outcome? And then we work out how we can go about it. So get painfully, painfully clear on what it is that you want as an outcome and then how you're going to map your behaviors towards that. So we can give some examples, I guess, from kind of either end of the spectrum and of the
Yeah.
extremes. No matter what, everyone's always going to have to start off with total calories. That's always going to be often depicted as the base of a pyramid when people talk about kind of priorities in nutrition and hierarchies. You have to start off with total calorie intake. And in order to know where you need to take your total calorie intake, you have to know where you're starting from. You have to know what point you're at now. So, where I would probably start with someone is if they've been tracking thus far, then you can see what your weight's done, as long as you're consistently weighing in and averaging those weights, and then what your food has been. And you can work out what your genuine maintenance level is from there. I think that is always going to be the place to start. You need to know that maintenance level because then you know where you can take it up from, and how much you take it up is going to depend on those goals, as we spoke about at the start. If someone hasn't been tracking up until this point, then you have to transition into some form of tracking, I think, in order to actually understand where that maintenance falls. I don't really agree with the idea of just putting your numbers into generic calorie calculators. You could do it across 10 different websites online and get 10 different numbers and not really
Yeah.
know where things are going to fall. And tracking for a few days doesn't mean you have to track forever. Like, don't see that as a prison sentence and something that you have to do to get results. It's just that you need to know where your food is honestly falling. So we always say to clients when they first come into us, if they've not got initial numbers, if they haven't been tracking previously, that track a couple days for me. Just like send it, just be completely honest and send them over to me. Don't change things because you know they're being looked over. Don't eat how you quote unquote think you should eat. Just continue doing what you have been doing and find out exactly where that intake falls. So record everything that goes in your mouth that has calories, whether that's food or drink. And then from that stage, from that stage, you can then actually see, right, here's where my numbers are. And from this point, you can then make inferences about what percentage you're going to take your calories up above that. Is that also where you'd start?
Yeah. Just to add to your bit about being painfully honest, I think it's worth being painfully honest with your physique in the first place as well.
Yeah.
So there's been some difficult conversations I know we've both had to have with people where they say, "Hey, look, I think I'm 18% body fat." As a female, that I've got a picture in my head of what I think 18% body fat looks like on a female. Obviously, everyone holds weight differently. And then, progress pictures come through, and I'm like, right, that's our first problem. So we've got an estimated kind of body fat measure. And then we've got this situation where that does, in my opinion, doesn't align with what the progress picture is telling me. So then it's a difficult conversation of, well, is that actually appropriate for you right now? Is a gaining phase really what you want? Because a lot of people, I think, would dive into a gaining phase because it's an easier thing to do in the sense that it aligns with their social habits, etc. So the first thing it would be for me would, just like you said, be painfully honest, but also be painfully honest with yourself. Am I actually in a place right now where gaining is a good idea?
Mm-hmm.
Do I have a low enough level of fat that warrants that if I do gain, and I'm going to probably gain some fat, it's very, very likely, what will I end up looking like then? And is that where I want to be? And then, as you perfectly said, you have to then sit down and say, am I willing to align my habits and behaviors with the outcome that I want to achieve? And so many people set off with the greatest ambition in the world. And how I would put it to you is, if everything was going really bad for you, could you still maintain those things? And if so, then likely they're a good set. Now, I'm not saying that, if shit hits the fan, you need to be able to maintain all of those goals, all of those habits, throughout the week. But at least 90% of them need to be able to be maintained if, you are going to achieve this thing. Because if you set those habits and behaviors up in week one, in week two, work gets really busy and they all go out the window, well, it's a pretty poor start for you because you've not set yourself up to win. You've just set yourself up to fail. And then you end up going, well, this hasn't really gone very well. This doesn't work for me. It does work for you. It's just that you didn't necessarily plan out exactly what was going to happen. So if you plan out your habits and behaviors from the onset for you to have a dream life and it's all sunshine and rainbows, unless you are a professional athlete, bodybuilder, etc., where your life is literally set up for these things, and even for them, sometimes shit hits the fan,
Mm-hmm.
injuries and so on, then it's unrealistic to assume that you can hit those calories smack on every single day. And I think that if you set yourself up to do that, it's going to be a pretty short process.
And key to this is actually going through this first stage as well, because I promise you that 90% of people listening to this who genuinely want the answers to these questions are going to hear this first point and go, yeah, okay, cool, but what about the numbers and stuff? What should my macros be? And just kind of
Yeah.
gloss over it. Sit down with a notebook, no other distractions, just you, your brain, pen and paper, and actually think this shit out. Like, properly give it the time of day, because until you've done that, things are going to crumble around you pretty quickly. Like Xander said, you're going to start going, one little thing's going to throw you off course, then you're just going to throw the towel in and everything's going to go to shit. And then you're going to be left feeling like you have to hit reset again, and constantly be in this kind of perpetual cycle of always feeling like you're starting up. Instead, I think it's really important to set those intentions early and those behaviors that are going to actually lead into achieving those things, manifesting those things, and then go from there. And then, even if things do go completely tits up, you're still then able to bring it back to what the skeleton is, what that main framework is. You know, like for me right now, I know that I'm gaining. I know that I want to go through a long, consistent gaining phase. I want to have to walk through doors sideways. Like I want to be so massive that I need new doors in my gaff. And so for that, right, I know that that means even if things go wrong, even if I have a few weeks here and there where, or even a few days where things go awry and my calories aren't where I need them to be, or maybe I take the cardio a little bit too far because I'm enjoying road cycling or whatever it is, if things go a bit wrong, I've always got a framework to come back to and I know what my North Star is, rather than just being like, oh, well, I messed that up. What do I do now? Where do I go? Am I too skinny? Am I too fat? Is this the problem? Is that the problem? And you always feel like you're just treading water.
A really good conversation I think I had with someone yesterday was, what is your anomaly? And what I mean by that is, what is the thing that you do that isn't the consistent one? So, is your anomaly that you work out and that you eat to your goal and your macros? So, do you go, hey, this week I hit it once out of 7? Or is your anomaly that every so often you don't hit them because something happens, or like you said, you take your cardio too far? So, I was saying to this guy, look, the really cool thing here is that your anomaly used to be that you would hit your sessions, or that you would manage to eat 3 meals a day, because this guy really struggles to eat 3 meals a day. So he would kind of just forget, be very busy at work, and then eat loads when he got home. And so, what is your anomaly? I said to him, and that used to be that you would hit 3 meals a day and that you would train 4 times a week. Now your anomaly is that you eat 1 meal a day and you train twice a week. Because he was saying to me, look, I don't feel like I've made much progress at the moment. And for going forward, it's like you said, when you are planning these things out, when you really want to do something, it's accepting that shit will happen, things will go wrong, but they are the anomaly. They are the things that stand out as like, oh, last week I ended up having a sporadic, I don't know, day out or something. I needed a day away and I ended up going over my macros or whatever. That's an anomaly. Whereas if these things happen all the time, the anomaly is actually that you've stuck to the plan. So you
Yeah.
need to choose a plan that you can stick to, and then the anomalies poke up from there. Else, it makes the process very difficult.
Yeah. And
Uh,
every day is just going to essentially become random because you don't have a
yeah,
set structure
absolutely.
that you're actually working from.
The other thing I said to him was, if you look, and a lot of people do this, if you look at how your life is structured. So if everyone who's listening to this now, press pause, get a pen and paper, and draw a big circle. Obviously you'll have had to press start again. Draw a big paper, draw crosshairs through that circle, and then write the 4 major areas of your life. Right, so you've got health and fitness, work, family and social life, and something else you like. So Jack, your something else might be cycling, for example, but everyone has their own thing, right? Then what you need to decide is how high these things rank in your life of priorities. So if you're a professional bodybuilder, that health and fitness is going to rank probably 90%, right? You might have 5% for health, for socials and family, and then maybe, your hobby would be bodybuilding, so that's fine, and maybe up here would cross over. So effectively, your health and fitness would take up most of your circle. But if you're someone who's saying, hey, I want to enjoy life, I want to, I have health and fitness goals, yes, but I also have social goals, I have family goals, then that needs to take up equal amount of time. So if you're saying to me, hey, I want to hit my health and fitness goals, I'm saying great. But if that's still only 25% of your overall capacity, then what are your social goals? If your social goals are to go out with your friends once a week because that's something that improves your mental health, you enjoy it, it's your hobby, blah, 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 then we also need to look at what goals lie inside that. And then it depends on which is at the time most important. So, we'll both agree there's times in your life where maybe health and fitness take over and you do a lot more gym, you do a lot more tracking, you do a lot more of this and that. And maybe your social life takes a backseat. But then there'll be times where actually health and fitness takes a smaller role in your life. And then socials take a bigger place. Maybe you go on holiday for a few weeks, you have a little bit of a party season in the summer or whatever, you go traveling. And it's important that you understand those things, because else it can become perpetually frustrating. And as you said earlier, you end up just having this start again every time. It's like, this messed it up. Oh no, health and fitness messed up my day out because I couldn't enjoy my food. But if you understand that they are two separate things, if that is the case for you, so for some people, as I said, that won't be the case. Sometimes health and fitness does kind of rule the roost, and that's absolutely fine. I'm just saying, for those of you who are listening where it doesn't rule the roost, understand that if you're out drinking and partying, maybe that's part of this goal, but understand that it will affect this one if they aren't managed kind of succinctly, but don't let one destroy the other if they're equal.
Yeah, I like that. So once we've got people with calories and they've either tracked for a while or they've been previously tracking, so they know where they're at, then you can dive into the kind of level of weight that you want to gain and what that goal is, because that's then going to dictate what your surplus is and kind of what you're aiming to gain. So let's say you might want to set a range, and that could be, you could generally talk about quite a wide range of like 5 to 15%, I think, as a surplus on top for people for calories. So if you were obviously looking to go towards the higher end, maybe you're then looking to gain more. But you also have to consider what other categories you kind of fall under as well. So I would only really tell people to shoot towards that kind of 15% surplus, which would be pretty high. That would be a fair chunk of calories. If people were either relatively new to it, so they could get those kind of newbie gains that people like to talk about, or if you were, say, someone with very good genetics, that you can put on muscle relatively easily, or if you were someone that doesn't mind a little bit of body fat coming with it as well, because we deal with a lot of people who want to gain, but they want to stay as lean as is reasonable whilst they do, like a lot of people want to. And so if you sit more in that category, you want to stay a bit leaner, maybe you're more advanced, or maybe you feel like you've got poor genetics and you don't really gain well, but you do gain body fat quite easily, then you might want to be pushing more down towards the 10-ish percent. And then 5% would be like a tiny surplus. That would be almost like you're kind of not changing. It's just going to be very small changes in terms of like maybe your strength is still able to progress a little bit. You're not just kind of fully stagnating in terms of body weight, but I wouldn't really call 5% like a gaining phase particularly. You're going to be mostly staying relatively similar. And then once you've got that surplus, you can break that down into macros themselves. And actually, one more thing on that, I should say the surplus itself isn't just fixed. It doesn't stay that way. Your calories don't stay the same. These are just kind of initial figures. So you may add on that 15% to start off. So your 2,000 calorie maintenance turns into 2,300 calories. That's a 15% increase, right? And then from that point onwards, you actually have to see how you respond to that and how you react to that. If you're not gaining consistently, you'll take it higher. If you're gaining too much, you might want to rein it in a little bit, etc. But from that point, once you've got those numbers, you can dive into macros. And the next kind of step, the next kind of most important thing is protein, and making sure that you get enough protein in per day and then spreading it evenly across your meals in the day, because protein is something that needs to be eaten relatively frequently, every 3 to 5 hours in relatively consistent servings. So once you have that total amount for the day, split that up into somewhere around 4 or 5 servings a day, split up by those hours. And that's the next most important thing. And every time we go along these stages, every time we look at one important thing, then the next most important thing, and we start building out these hierarchies, understand that dependent on your goals and how seriously you want to take this, you can stop at any one number of these steps. And so if you're someone who wants maximal flexibility and you're not too worried about eking out every last pound of muscle gain, you might stop at total calories. You might say, right, as long as I've got enough total calories to be in a surplus, I'm good to go. I don't care if those calories come from protein, carbs, fats, booze. I mean, booze is obviously not going to be ideal. You're probably not going to gain much muscle. But if you're going to be loose with it, maybe you stop at calories. When you want to take it a next step up, then you add in protein and you hit a protein minimum for the day. Ideally, you space that protein out into equal servings. And only once you've ticked these things off and you've taken care of these things, do you then want to start to be looking at things like carb to fat splits, meal timing throughout the day for those, and kind of the minutia from there. And it's important to understand that you can stop at any one of those points. I think people can start off with, I want to gain, but then it almost looks too overwhelming with everything that they might have to consider and what they might have to commit to it. But if you've done what we initially said you should do, and you've sat down with that pen and paper and you've been honest with yourself and you've said, look, I've got an active social life right now. I'm really enjoying being able to see family again, see friends again, go out to the pub again. Then in all of those cases, you have to just understand, right, maybe I'm only willing to go up to the level of tracking calories. And beyond that, I'm happy to accept that I'm not going to get all of the possible results out there, because I'm trading that for a more flexible lifestyle.
So I picked up 3 points throughout what you just said that I think it's important for people to have in mind when they go through that process. The first one is that when you choose that increase in calories, do stick with it for a little bit, maybe 2 weeks or more. When I've seen people go from low calories and that initial jump, sometimes you can see a kind of exponential jump in body weight as well. But don't forget, that's not going to be fat per se. People panic. They'll go, oh my God, I've gained 3 pounds, I'm getting fat. That's just factually not the case, unless you've gone haywire and, gone mad with the calories. If you've stuck to the calories that you've been set, there's a large chance there's going to be water. There's a large chance there's going to be simple glycogen stores, but also food in the gut, right? People often forget that when you eat more, there's more going to be inside you, right? So if, for example, you were walking through an apple field or an orchard rather, and you start shoving your pockets full of apples, you're going to weigh more at the end than you did at the start. And that's purely because you have more mass on you than you did at the very start. So that's something to consider. And one of the things I do see and have spoke to people about is that a lot of people shit the bed at that point and go, no, I can't do this, I'm out. And I do understand that. I'm not being unsympathetic for people who struggle with kind of body weight issues and seeing the scales go up. What I am saying is that hopefully you have a coach who's got experience and is saying to you, don't worry about it, because this is going to calm down. And a lot of the time it just peters off. You might have that 3 pound gain or so in the first week, and then it just starts to climb back down. And you might average out at a 1 pound gain for the 2 weeks. It may also be that after that 2 weeks, you might be the complete other end of the scale. You might not have gained a damn thing. And in which case, okay, let's go up. But I feel like a lot of people don't give it a chance. It's a bit like maintenance phases. When you put people back to maintenance, their weight will either go up or down. And then they're like, oh, okay, we need to change things. Don't just be patient, because if you aren't, you will be jumping up and down throughout the calories, and it makes it very, very difficult to find a set point. And that's when I think people tend to give up. They're like, look, this is ridiculous. I can't do this. So that would be my first point. My second point.
Can I say one thing on the?
Yeah, go for it.
You gave the example of food volume as well. Something I always tell clients is about water as well. Remembering that 1 gram of water is equivalent to 1 milliliter is a really nice way to visualize it, because even just then a standard small tumbler of water is about 300 mil. So that is equivalent to 0.3 kilos, which is roughly 1 pound. And so when you wake up in the morning, or you look at your check-ins at the end of the week and you're shitting yourself because you're 0.3 kilos up, go and drink a single tumbler of water and you'll see that that's the only difference there. A single glass of water. And when you consider what's going on in your body, especially for females with hormones as well, you realize just how much of a small fluctuation that actually is, and that losing your shit over 0.3 kilos or very small amounts of weight is futile, especially over the long run. I think it just helps to have something to visualize that with when it comes to water and, like your example, food.
you've just touched on my second point, which is going to be menstrual cycles, time of the month. When are you making this decision? So
Mm-hmm.
we know that obviously weight will fluctuate through the month. So if you're someone who has a record of this, and it's something that we've started tracking with clients now, so where we have body weight, we have a little bit of a note section next to net just for them to let us know whereabouts in that cycle we are. Because if we look at how people fluctuate, and I have some clients who don't fluctuate at all, I have some clients who fluctuate massive amounts. And if you know that, then we spoke about this actually in a podcast a few weeks ago. If you know something is going to happen, it lowers the anxiety of that a great deal, because anxiety typically happens for the unknown, right? So if you know that in weeks 1 and 3, they're going to be your lightest weeks, which is typically true of a lot of females based on hormone profiles throughout the month. And weeks 2 and 4 then are your heaviest. If you start a gaining phase in week 4, and that's typically where, even last month when you were at maintenance, you gained 2 pounds during that week. If you then gain 4 pounds as you've started your gaining phase in week 4, you can kind of say, well, on average, I used to gain 2 pounds during my 4th week of my cycle. Therefore, I could probably remove those 2 pounds and say, actually, this week is just 2 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's important that you recognize that, because, again, this is where I find that the conversations are difficult, because we haven't necessarily recognized where we are and what might happen. And if we can include that in that initial thing, like you said, in that honest picture of the situation, then it lowers that anxiety a massive amount. Because, just saying, hey, you know what, you might gain 4 pounds this week, but look, you usually gain 2 pounds. With the fluctuation we may get from this added food, it may be another 2 pounds. So if you gain 4 pounds at the end of the week, send me an email, let me know, like DM me, say, look, this has happened, but we'll just monitor it for the next week, and then hopefully we'll watch that come back down. And 9 times out of 10, it does.
Yeah. And if you're someone who feels like you really can't deal with that, you don't have a coach to directly speak that out with, don't weigh yourself around your period. Like it can really be that simple.
Yeah, I totally agree.
You can weigh yourself weeks 1 through 3, and then not weigh yourself throughout week 4, and then start weighing yourself again at week 5, and just keep repeating through that cycle. It means that you're not constantly worrying of like, is it water? Is it body fat? Should I be changing this? Should I be changing that? You just pick it up. You say, right, I'm going to punt it into the future another week or so. I'll keep doing what I'm doing. And you just kind of avoid the pain around that if it's something that you do struggle with.
So that takes me perfectly onto my third point, which is input versus output. So if you are someone who struggles with seeing body weight, do exactly as Jack said. Don't bother weighing yourself for that week, because what you know is that the body will always track your input. Whether you weigh yourself, you track the food or not, your body is always tracking, because that's how it works. It's a system that is based on hundreds of thousands of hormones which effectively monitor these things. So if you didn't weigh yourself, or you didn't track any of your food for a week, your body doesn't take the week off and go, sweet. It's still going to track that stuff. So don't worry about that as long as you nail the inputs. And that was my third point, because with any gaining phase or cutting phase or anything like that, it's important that you nail all the inputs that you can. And if you do that, and you can look yourself in the mirror at the end of the week and say, I nailed all my inputs, whatever the outputs aren't a measure of your doing of that process, because you can't control if your body decides to hold on to water. You can't control if you decide to go to the bathroom before you weigh in necessarily. An easy example is, we can control how much food we eat, but I can't just go, hey Jack, before I drive down and see you, I'm just going to go to the toilet because I need the toilet now. It's not a switch. I either need the toilet or I don't need the toilet. And so I have full control over the input, but I don't have that control over the output. So if we look at all the factors that we input, and this includes training as well, that's a huge one here. If you don't train, you aren't going to grow much muscle. So if we look at training, we look at nutrition, we look at sleep recovery, and stress management for muscle growth is obviously very important things. If your input to all of those things is great, and the output says, hey, I've gained nothing this week, that doesn't mean you failed. That doesn't mean you've done a bad job. It just means, hey, we know that we've got a really great starting point. Let's build from here.
Mm-hmm. That thing you said about tracking just made me think of a funny example that I had a while ago. I was speaking to a PT in a gym, and we were speaking about tracking nutrition, saying, yeah, I do it, I track everything, but I'm not really losing body fat. And I was like, oh, but you actually put like everything into my fitness pal. She was like, Yeah, yeah. Apart from biscuits, I never put biscuits in. It's like, why do you not put biscuits in specifically? She's like, well, I feel like if I put them in, they always take me over my calories, and I don't want to see that. And I'm like, but
If you don't track your calories, they can't go over.
Schrodinger's calories. Like, if you're not tracking them, they're taking you over your calories, and you don't want to see that. That's probably why you're not losing weight. I'd
Yeah.
imagine if that's taking you over. So yeah, you've got calories, you've got protein, and we've spoken about then putting things into carb and fat splits once we've taken care of all of those
Yep.
things. And the extra calories that you kind of add in from there are going to come predominantly from carbs and fats. Some clients will ask us, why is my protein not going up at the same sort of rate as my carbs do, for example? Protein can creep up incrementally. We normally bring it up as a bit of a secondary measure. If carbs start to get really high, you'll find that you're getting 5 grams from a bowl of oats, 3 grams from some bread, etc., etc. So we bump protein up a bit just to make it easier to hit throughout the day. But you don't need to ramp protein up incessantly like you would with carbs, say, to take calories up if you need to go a lot higher with calories. So making those bumps up predominantly from carbs and fats, and as Xander said, giving yourself a good amount of time to say, right, it's been a week, 10 days, 2 weeks, and I've really given these numbers a fair crack. That's important. Don't just hop off those numbers after a couple of days. Make sure that you are hitting them truthfully in order to actually give it a good run, and then making those adjustments as you go to continue the gaining going. But then we can throw in the spanner in the works that you spoke about of people wanting to socialize a lot more now as well, and wanting to factor in things around that. So, what are a couple of things that you would tell clients who said, I want to socialize more, but I still want to achieve my goals? What would be the things that you would first recommend?
Firstly, it would depend on the level of socialization, of course. So it is very different going to a wedding or going to the pub on a Friday night.
Well, let's give like a standard middle of the
Yeah.
road example, and let's say someone wants to do a couple of events on the weekends and maybe one thing on a weeknight. So 2 or 3 things a week. Maybe there's a dinner in there or a brunch in there. There's a little bit of moderate drinking and standard sort of stuff.
Cool. So where I would go with that, I first of all would seek to find out what they usually would do. So if this person would usually go with, I don't know, 6 pints, a burger in the meal, but then they'd also maybe grab a pizza or some chips at the end of the night out, for example, which is quite common, I think, if you look at a lot of people's kind of, burger van traits at the end of a night out.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember the triple burgers they used to do at Timepiece?
I actually have never had a triple burger from Timepiece.
Right, they were special.
Memes. So the first thing I would do is figure that out, because if they're someone who maybe eats very much, so if we look at the difference between males and females when drinking, I think a lot of females will be people who drink but don't necessarily eat with that, whereas in males I feel that when they drink they tend to eat more. So when we have, say, let's take our original female, our 18% female, if she goes out and has, she just me, usually when I go out with the girls, I have a meal, then we have a few glasses of wine, maybe some cocktails. Now, if that actually aligns with where they want to be, I'd be like, right, well, crack on with that. We won't track it because you're not going to wander around a nightclub or whatever with a phone in your hand, realistically. But we'll let the body see what it does. So on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, we'll see what the average of that is. And if it's still in keeping with what we want to do, maybe we don't need to change anything. However, it can go the other way, either way. You can either undereat throughout that process, because if you're drinking, maybe you don't eat so much, or maybe the drinks that you have are, vodka lime soda, so very little calories in the sense that you could be having a cocktail which has like close to 1,000, for example. Then, okay, well, what we need to do then is we need to load up the morning and we need to load up the afternoon afternoon lunch, sorry, so that when you have less in the evening, it still is amounting to where we want to be going next week in terms of body weight. And if you go the other way, you're someone who eats a lot, well, there's changes you can make to your meals that are pretty efficient. So, for example, if you're somebody who has a big meal, loads of beers, and then something at the end of the night out, it might be the case that you go, right, where do I make my first swap? So I wouldn't go in and with a wrecking ball and say, right, let's just wipe out this process and change everything. But what can we modify to start with that will make this process still enjoyable for you, but at the same time, it's something that we can also eke out some more gains with in the week to come. Well, okay, at the moment we're going well over, which means if we do this both nights at the weekend, we're going to be £5 up by the end of next week. And we don't really want to be there. We want to be £2 up by the end of next week, for example. Okay, so where would we go? Well, we'll look at the first meal. If you're someone who has like a massive pizza, for example, maybe you get one of those pizzas which has the hole cut out in the middle with some kind of salad garnishing. And even if you have the hole cut out in the middle of a pizza, that can take out like 300 calories depending on where you get it from. So that's an easy swap, right?
And there can be so many little ones like that, like ask for half cheese on it or something, and you'll drop
Yeah,
loads of fat calories, or
yeah,
split a pizza with someone and get a side salad as well. And it's simply just making a decision like that, understanding the implications of that, and then having some kind of wiggle room and things to work with because of it.
absolutely. The other thing I find people tend to do is not seem to drink much in the afternoon. And I'm not saying go and booze from 3 o'clock onwards. I mean, drink water. So if you go on a night out, go feeling full already. Go with a lot of water in your system. Go
Mm-hmm.
with a lot. So when you get there, for example, when a lot of people finish work on a Friday, dying for a beer, if you've drunk enough through the day, the chances are you're not really needing something that's thirst clenching, but it might just be nice to go for a beer. So the difference in that is that you go there, you bolt the first one, and it's like, right, let's have the other one. So that first one's done absolutely nothing for you,
Mm-hmm.
and then you need another one. Whereas if you had a sufficient amount of fluids throughout the afternoon, the likelihood is that first one will last a lot longer. And if you are even more concerned about that, what you can do is do what I tend to do. I usually get like a pint of Pepsi Max, for example. If I'm having a pint of cider with my dinner, for example, then I'll drink my Pepsi Max first because one, that takes some kind of thirst clench, but it also bloats me a little bit. So then that pint will last a lot longer because I'm already a pint down. And then I don't drink much anyway. So by the time I've drunk that one pint, I'm good fun anyway. But um,
One pint and you're anyone's.
exactly, on Tin Wonder. Um, and, uh, and then by doing that, you've already set yourself up with the potential to drink less because you're already relatively full. Then if you add the meal that we've just discussed, and obviously I find that ego will play a role in this. So when lads tend to go out together, who can eat the pizza the quickest or who can have the biggest pizza? It's just about accepting that, that's not necessarily going to be very helpful for you.
Yeah,
So,
and it's not a game you want to win. It's not a game you want to play. Like pick
no,
your battles. And the same thing for what you said about drinking goes with eating as well. Like when I'm dieting, if I'm going out for a meal, I'll slam a big old bowl of veggies and salad beforehand. Just
yeah,
so actually when I go out, I can like actually look at a menu objectively and choose something that I want to eat with intention, rather than being like, oh my God, I'm starving. I want everything
yeah,
and anything. And can I have that extra bread on the table and everything
yeah.
else?
It's just like they say, isn't it? Don't go shopping when you're hungry. Don't go out for a meal when you're hungry
Yeah.
because that starter is going to be on average 25 minutes, 30 minutes away. So
Hmm.
what are you going to do? Fill that time? Let's have some bread and oil.
Yeah.
Lovely. And it just amounts. So that's what I would do. And
And if
obviously it's
you,
going to be
sorry, one
different.
more thing, mate, as well. If you take care of these behavioral things, often a lot of the numbers fall in line themselves. If you've already taken care of just some of those key things that we've mentioned, you don't have to worry about getting the chef to weigh out your chicken breast, or any of these like tiny minutia things that you might think you quote unquote have to do if you're like wanting to hit your goals and eat out. You're just
Yeah.
taking care, you're putting in those big stones, and the rest of the small stones in the sand just fall around it all and fill that stuff in just fine.
Absolutely. And like you said, that is the key to being able to adhere to this process for longer. If you're
Hmm.
looking at gaining and being able to maintain a social life, you can't go through the process doing all the most fatiguing things. And fatiguing things doesn't mean training, it means going and asking the chef to do this. Standing up in front of your friends and being like, hey, can I actually have none of this, none of this, none of that? And can you also heat these up for me? That is quite fatiguing because it's a process which you have to constantly be thinking about.
Hmm.
And that's just not going to be very good for longevity if you're someone who wants to enjoy a social life alongside that process.
Yeah.
So, last kind of points for us to touch on then is, and this is something I think a lot of people ask, is how do you know when to stop? How do you know when's enough's enough? Like, At what point do you decide the gaining phase is up? And then what do you do when you do decide that?
I've been having good conversations with my brother-in-law about this at the moment. He's got into the gym in the last couple of years, actually, to be fair, and is going through a gaining phase at the moment. He started off with a very similar physique to what I did, and he's gaining at the moment. And he was asking the same thing: when should I stop? I've seen some people online say you should do 8 weeks, you should do 12 weeks. Should I gain this number of kilos, that number of kilos? The important thing is to always just have an honest analysis as you go. Once you know that long term goal, like we spoke about at the start, you know kind of where you're trying to get to, and then you know what points there are going to be along that road. So if your goal is to gain as much as possible, you're going to want to push those gaining phases as much as you can up to the level that you're comfortable with. So if your goal is to gain maximal amounts of muscle, there's no point in you saying, right, I'm going to gain for 8 weeks and then I'm going to cut for 4 and I'm going to rinse and repeat that cycle, especially if you're someone who is really struggling to gain muscle but maybe loses body fat easier. You want to put in a prolonged amount of time. How you might measure that along the way, I think a really nice kind of generic baseline is like 10% of body weight to aim for gaining. And only once you're at that point, I think, again, if you want to gain a lot of muscle, only once you're at that point should you really then start to say, what do I want to do here? Do I want to spend a couple of weeks at maintenance, have a bit of a break, whatever? So that would mean if you're 70 kilos, you go until you're about 77 kilos. And you should have done that over a nice gradual way of gaining as well. We promote gaining around about 0.25 to 0.5% of body weight per week. So if you're going for 10%, that's going to take you around, possibly 10, 20, 30 weeks plus, depending what sort of rate you're falling on week to week within that scale. And once you get to that level, then you can honestly assess and say, right, can I keep pushing this? Am I still responding well? I'll always put questions back to clients and say, how do you feel on this amount of food? Is this a horrible struggle every single day? Or is this something that you feel like, I'm good to go, I can keep going? Are you stalling out in the gym? Or is your strength still going up? Are you good? If we're ticking all of these boxes and everything's good, there's no need to just slap a generic 10% on it and say we're going to stop. Like, keep going, keep pushing it if you can and if you want to. Whereas if you're getting to a level where maybe you've only gained 5, 6, 7% of body weight, but the food is a real struggle and you're doing everything you can to alleviate that, you've actually gained a bit more body fat than you wanted to, and your training's starting to stall out, then you want to stop and reassess, and you want to actually have a look at how you can reapproach that in another way. But like I said at the start, and like I said, everyone's going to be sick of me saying this, but there's only situational right and wrong. I'll give my brother-in-law again as an example. He said to me, look, I can shred body fat like it's no one's business. I can just do a little bit extra walking, go for an extra dog walk a day, or, just eat like normal, and I drop body fat like that. But he really struggles to gain. So I was like, why are you then looking to hop back into a cut so quickly? Like, if you're someone who can drop that body fat really quickly, why not spend an extra 1, 2, 3, 4 months gaining? And that extra body fat that you gain in that time, you can probably drop in like 2 weeks, literally, because you're someone who strips body fat really quickly, you don't gain so easily. So always map it towards your situation, what your end goal is, and then how it is that your body kind of behaves in getting to those goals as well. Start to look for key signs. I think the key things that we tend to look at with clients are things like appetite, are things like training performance, just mood as well, and how they're feeling, how they're actually coping with it all. Definitely strength when it comes to gaining as well, just like straight up linear strength progression in the gym as well. And it's only once a couple of those variables start going wrong and they're consistently going wrong, they're not just getting fixed by a deload or, a weekend away or something like that, where I think you then need to start taking steps as to maybe go into a maintenance phase, maybe do a mini cut. But you always want to be spending as much time as you possibly can aiming towards that goal. If your goal is to gain a lot of muscle mass, you want to maximize the amount of time that you are in a surplus. You don't want to spend loads of time mini cutting or just maintaining or, kind of undoing the good work that you have done so far.
Yeah, I've got 2 points to just add / agree with you on there. The first one is that if you're going to do this process, and you're someone who fundamentally hasn't been there before. So say you are very good at cutting and you haven't necessarily gone through the gaining phase that would get you that good amount of like lean muscle mass as a result, then don't stop until you get there. Because if you do 10 weeks, say, then you go, right, I tell you what, I'm going to go through a 6 week cutting phase now to see what I've done. That's 16 weeks out of your year gone. And I saw this analogy the other day is you don't plant a carrot and dig it up every day to see if it's grown. And that's exactly what people do. They
Yeah.
go, right, I've gained for 12 weeks. Time to strip off the fat and see what I've got.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you put your cake in the oven, leave the damn thing there until the alarm goes off, right? And that alarm is all the things you've just said. Have you got appetite still? All of those things, they are fundamentals in deciding, do you continue or do you not?
Mm-hmm.
There are always nuances to these situations. So, just like we wouldn't advise you go on bodybuilding.com and find out your daily calorie allowance, don't go and say, right, I'm only doing this for 6 weeks or I'm only doing this for 10 weeks. If you're a professional and you've got stage meets next year, then obviously there's going to be some array of timings that you need to be aware of.
Mm-hmm.
But if not, don't limit yourself. Don't put that glass roof on your head for something which you just don't need. Crack on, carry on going. Because, I've had, and I'm sure you will have as well, clients who have got to the phase where you would have thought that would have been sufficient. You're 15, 20 weeks and you're like, right, I'm expecting at this check-in, they're going to be like, right, enough's enough. And again, they're like, cool, let's keep going.
Yeah, and
And
they're
if
feeling
you'd
great.
have if you'd have turned around at that point, they might have only gained like a pound, maybe 2 pounds of lean muscle mass. And then when they get back to looking lean, they're like, well, what a fucking waste of time that was, because
Mm-hmm.
I've spent 35, 40 weeks doing this, not got much out of it because, they spent 10 weeks cutting, say.
Yeah.
And you just, you want to get the fruit you've gone to get. And if you commit to that and you've been honest with all the processes we've spoken about so far today, I just don't think you can lose. I don't think you can come out second best in this process.
Mm-hmm. And
Is there any kind of
to give some context on that as well, like for me saying that I want to gain a lot going forwards, I mean, for me, with my stage of where I'm at in training at the moment, it's probably looking like you're talking maybe 10 kilos would be like the max that I could maybe eke out of this.
naughty?
But that's going to be, I mean, mate, I fully plan on doing this until next summer,
Yeah.
minimum. And there may be weeks along the way where I take a little bit of a bulking break. And, there may be times where if appetite is really just out of whack and I need a little bit of a reset, I'll take that time. But what I'm going to be looking to doing is every one of those dips, making that as short and as quick as possible. Every time I take a little bit of time out just to reset my appetite, I want to know the second that I can get back on it, I am, because I want to be maximizing that time in that gaining phase. So always think, like Xander said, spending as much of your year as you possibly can in that phase where you want to be, actually mapping towards that goal.
And to cross that back over to what we were talking about with social events and things earlier, if social events are a massive part of it, then you might want to extend that gap if you're saying, I'm going to do this for X amount of time, because that would give you the opportunity to have those phases where you focus less on fitness and more on yourself. And I said this to a client on Monday. She said, how long do you think it will take me to reach my goal? And I said 18 months. And she replied with, that was not what I wanted to hear, but I appreciate your honesty. And the reason I said that was purely because if I pin all the phases I know that she'll need to go through to get there, and then I add in a load of little social phases, then that process becomes more sustainable. Now, to be quite honest, it probably won't take that long. But if you set yourself up to be aware that it might take that long, then at least the understanding of that process is far better. Whereas if I said, hey, 6 months, and in 6 months' time, she's like, well, I'm absolutely nowhere to where I want to be. And she's not enjoyed herself along the way. She's tried to prioritize one thing far more than the other and didn't want to do that. Then the whole process becomes a mess and you've wasted 6 months.
And the
Whereas,
longer the process is as well, the more seriously you're going to take it. And the more I think you actually have to think critically and tactically about it. Whereas when people say, I'm going to do a 12-week bulk, and the next day they're smashing Domino's pizzas and Ben and Jerry's, and it's like an all-out, how much can I gain? How much can I gain?
yeah,
And you get dudes come up to you in the gym, they're like, yeah, I'm 5 kilos up in a week, bulking's going well. And I'm like, fucking that's that's 4.5 kilos of water and fat right there.
Yeah.
And all of that you're then just going to have to spend time stripping off when it comes to the dieting phase. So give it the time and the respect that it deserves. Take it seriously because it is going to be a longer term thing. And because of that, know that you have to have your dominoes in place. You have to have those behaviors actually sat there that will allow you to execute it over a longer time frame, rather than saying, right, I'm just going to go balls to the walls for 12 weeks and then we'll see what happens after that.
A final point from me, I'd say two things. Firstly, don't start anything you don't intend to continue. So if you're going to eat like an asshole throughout your whole gaining phase, remember that when it comes to cutting, that's going to be damn hard because you're going to have to reverse all of those things. And as a final tip, when you do start your gaining phase, consider this. Do I have to start eating a load of different food, or do I just have to eat more of the same food? So I'm a really big fan of when there's small increases in calories, just saying, don't change your diet, just eat more of the same stuff. Because fundamentally, if you start, for example, if you add 150 calories a day and you eat a very standardized diet, you could probably add another 10 grams of oats to your lunch, to your breakfast, if you have oats for breakfast. You could add another piece of bread if you have some kind of sandwich for lunch, and for dinner you might add another spoonful of something. Now that won't start really waking up your hedonic sensors in your brain going, let's nail pizza, let's nail chocolate. Whereas if you go and you've got 250 extra calories, you go, right, mighty meaty from Domino's, here we go, and that eats up the whole of those calories. You've got nothing for the rest of the day. You're then hungry. I'm not saying you're going to have it for breakfast, but hear me out. You're hungry, and then you end up going over massively, and that's how you end up being that guy in the gym going, I gained 5 kilos this week. So remember, you don't have to change your diet just because there's more calories. You could just add more of the same stuff. And for adherence, I believe that would be a good method, unless you're someone who really struggles with getting the food in, and in which case it may be worth adding some kind of carb powder, maybe a sports drink around your training, potentially even some intra-workout Haribo, as I used to call it. Bit of Haribo pre-workout. That stuff can really help, but at least the structure of a diet remains the same. Any lasting points for us, Jack?
It's a long-term game. Everyone says this. Everyone gives it kind of lip service, but internalize it, realize that, and really accept it. That changing your physique, and especially making drastic changes to your physique, is a really long-term process. And once you accept that and internalize it, you can then start to understand how you're going to actually materialize it and how you're going to make that happen in terms of working within the bigger picture and bigger structure of your life, rather than thinking of as just one-off moments where you suddenly gain all this muscle and then you've got it and you're good and you're done. Similar to like building up savings or building up wealth. People think it's this one get-rich-quick scheme that suddenly happens and then you're good for the rest of your life. Whereas actually, for the large majority of people, it's a slow burn over the course of their lifetime. Same thing goes with building a physique. Think of it in that same sort of vein.
Spot on. Fantastic place to end there. So from Jack and I, thank you ever so much, everyone, for listening. Hope you have a great day. Enjoy the sun. Be safe. And we'll catch you all soon. Take care for now. We're going to be adding in a Q&A to the podcast in a few weeks' time. And to do that, we're going to need some questions from you guys. So do go over to our team Instagram page at JLX Coaching on Instagram, of course, and click the link in the bio, and it will take you to a quick Google form where you can fill in any of the questions you've got, and we will get to those in the podcast to come. As for coaching, you can also check the link in our Instagram bio for that, or go to the website, which is at the moment jacklenton.com, and you will see the links to coaching there. Have a good day.